Rest on Guernsey is an initiative instigated by professional groups and individuals with an interest in World War II fortifications, with support from the States of Guernsey Museum Services. They have restored various historic sites and have opened them up for public viewing. Other fortifications have been put to other uses. This commentary has been pre-recorded from a German bunker, now converted to a recording studio. On the 8th of May 1945, the islanders were informed by the German authorities that the war was over. Churchill made a radio broadcast on the same day where he announced that the hostilities would officially end on midnight on the 9th of May 1945, but in the interest of saving lives, the ceasefire had begun the day before. He also noted that the Channel Islands were to be freed. The island was liberated on the 9th of May 1945, when HMS Bulldog arrived in St. Peter Port, and the German forces surrendered unconditionally aboard the vessel at dawn. British forces landed in St. Peter Port shortly afterwards and were greeted by crowds of joyous islanders singing Sanya Cherie. We continue to celebrate Liberation Day every year. It is a national holiday with parish events and the closure of the town seafront for music, family events and traditional stalls. Guernsey used to be famous for its tomato exports, with tomato growing starting around the mid-1800s. The growers used the vine houses that had been built for the growing of grapes. These vine houses were very often built against the gable of a house and would face south to get maximum sunshine. This is why the batches of greenhouses are still called vineries. When exports to the UK began to increase, full-size vine houses were built, and later large batches joined together became the norm. In the late 1960s, nearly 500 million tomatoes were picked and exported to the UK. Each one of those had to be hand-picked, then packed and shipped by sea. In the early days of export, the tomatoes were sent to the UK in wicker baskets. In later years, wooden chick boxes were used. In the 1970s, many growers were encouraged to modernise their vineries, building new aluminium batches and installing the latest equipment to heat the vineries. About this time, the global price of oil dramatically increased, and the local growers found it very difficult to compete with cheaper imports from Holland, where their growers received oil subsidies. Many local growers went out of business, even losing their homes. The growing industries went into decline from that time, although some growers did change to alternative crops like peppers, kiwi fruit, aubergines and flower growing. Formed in the late 19th century, the Guernsey Water Company operated as the only island's water supplier and distributor. By 1920, the company was providing water to 1,850 domestic customers, consuming an average of 550 megalitres of untreated water each year. The primary water sources at that time were 7 wells in the St Martins and Forest areas. In 1920, it was agreed that the state should take over the responsibility for the island's water supply, and the state's water board was formed. It was an inauspicious start, as the following year had the lowest rainfall ever recorded, putting the island's water supplies under great strain. During the next 15 years, the board constructed the island's first water treatment works at King's Mills and St Saviour's, which utilised gravity filters and chlorination equipment. Pumping stations were built to make use of water flowing through the island's valleys. In 1930, consumption had more than doubled to 1,100 megalitres every year, and it was clear that increased storage capacity would be required. Initially, disused quarries on the north of the island were purchased to help maintain supplies, but it was clear that demand was only going to increase further. In 1936, the board proposed the construction of an impounding reservoir at St Saviour's Valley, which would create a 1,090 megalitres reservoir. The project was agreed and work began in 1938. Work on the dam was halted during World War II, but commenced again in 1946 following the island's liberation from the occupying forces. The dam was sealed in January 1947, and by April the reservoir was full to overflowing. In the drought of 1976, reserves were so low it was possible to see the houses in the bottom of the reservoir. The reservoir holds 1,100 megalitres. St Saviour's Church is one of Guernsey's ancient parish churches, dating from the 14th century. It is part of the Church of England and is in the Diocese of Winchester. The middle section of the church is the oldest part of the church. There were later extensions of both nave and aisle eastwards and westwards, including the tower. Substantial rebuilding with some alterations was carried out at various times, and one of the major repairs resulted from an incident on Sunday, January the 30th, in 1658. During evensong on that afternoon, a thunderstorm started, and with the third thunderclap, lightning struck the church. The people in the congregation were thrown to the ground, and some worshippers were so badly shocked they were unable to walk home, though no one was seriously hurt. The damage to the church was substantial. Part of the tower collapsed. The spire was lifted 18 feet into the air, and the smallest of the bells crashed to the ground and was broken. A portion of the north wall of the church was demolished, and a window with it. In the early 18th century, the building at the east end of the north aisle, now a vestry, was built to house a parish cannon and military equipment, and in 1831 the west end of the church was shut off by a brick wall for use as a militia store. Church services were conducted in French until the middle of the 19th century, and that language did not cease to be used in St Saviour's Church until about 1932. As a consequence, in 1553, King Edward's second prayer book was translated into French for use in the Channel Islands. In 1662, the Book of Common Prayer was translated into French by the Jerseyman, the Reverend John Durrell, for use across the Channel Islands. During the occupation, the church again had a military use when the Germans used the tower as an observation post, constructing a chamber in the spire and cutting peepholes through the lead covering. Also, a huge complex of tunnels was constructed, extending under the church land. In 1680, Jean-Baptiste de La Salle founded the Brothers of the Christian Schools, a religious fraternity devoted to the education of boys. The order flourished, and by the early 20th century, more than 6,000 brothers were teaching French. In 1904, the Brothers de La Salle first came to Guernsey to set up a teaching order. They have a calling to provide schools for boys who would otherwise not be educated. France had just banned faith schools, so the de La Salle brothers were finding new